Very much, Roger, for that introduction, and President Hewitt, and thank you for having me here today. I've just got a few thoughts on where we've been, where we are now, and where we should be going. So I'll launch into them with a click of this button. A vision for Wellington. So in the past, we built things like the Wellington Railway Station and the Houses of Parliament. We were a relatively grand city, in the way that all cities were. You know, if we had to build the railway station today, we just wouldn't do it. We used to have our fair share of rugby tests. The highest house prices were always Eastbourne in the country. You know, it's interesting because now Auckland's got 11 suburbs with the average price of a house of $1 million. And we used to have a morning and afternoon paper, and I grieved that when it went because it was a distinguishing feature of Wellington. It really set us apart. And it wasn't really canned out of lack of profit. It was canned for sort of other efficiency ideas. We used to have countless head offices. We used to have Fonterra, Westpac, insurance companies, B and Z, and all of the CEOs that implied meant that the social centre for those types of character was always Wellington. The Normandy and that little hotel up, that little place up Cuba Street. Orsini's, yeah. The place was awash with people drinking boatloads of champagne. Now, that did make the city. I'm not saying that. Sorry. Well, we still got Bob Jones. That's right. And now we used to have 50% more office capacity than Auckland. So we used to have 1.5 million metres, and they used to have 1 million, or 900,000 in those days. And these are all just little snapshots. They're not all at the same time. They're just my recollections of the way we were at various points in the past. 3 people lived in the city. That was Michael Fowler's famous remark. I think we knew 2 of them actually, so they probably were 6. They were caretakers typically. And we actually, when we developed Commerce House, Peter and his wife Sheila, I think, they were so desperately keen to get out of town, they raced off to Marston at 100 miles an hour to discover a proper life. And at almost the same time, lots of other people were discovering the city and thinking it was utterly fantastic. So they left at almost exactly the wrong point. We used to be on the government's radar. Now, we're off the government's radar. Every time I come across one of these characters, Wellington seems to be the last thing on their minds. We have about the same office capacity as Auckland now, so we're about both 1.5 million square metres. Interestingly, that's a quarter of Sydney's office capacity.
What percentage does that government?
Well, about 40%, but then there's other things that rely upon government, so it's very hard to get a real figure. I would think it's probably more like 60%. It depends on government. See, a lot of people wouldn't be here if the government wasn't here. And at the moment we're about 20% vacant, and that's about 15,000 desks. So the reason I go on about this all the time, apart from being the owner of office buildings, there's a bit of self-interest for you, is that that's Wellington's form of income. Like, the economy of Wellington is almost utterly dependent upon this, albeit oversized, out of proportion office part. Because we don't do all the other things. We have the same, you think about it for a moment, we have the same office capacity as Auckland, but Auckland's got 4 times the population. In that sprawl is happening all the things we don't do. And whether that's good or bad, I'm not saying, I'm just saying whether we like it or not, we're stuck with the vision of Wellington as a skyscraper. It's a big building full of people with suits on. About 12,000 people live in the city. I don't know whether that's accurate. It's around about right. People keep on buying apartments and some rent. To fly further in Australia, we need to first go to Auckland or Christchurch. This was a city that used to connect to Sydney with a flying boat from Evans Bay in 1950 when we embraced international air travel then. But we've slipped right off the page, really. We do not have the majority of head offices. In fact, we have so few of these, $1 million CEOs that society no longer exists in Wellington. We are New Zealand's 3rd city, we're constantly reminded. And we are very polite about it. So a lot of us say things like, we don't want to hurt Auckland, which I find quite remarkable. Okay, so this is me, and this is the future, and this is why I think we will go, because I think we've almost got to that point in our career where we just about had enough. And it's the time of evolution where people start reacting to the fact that we're not getting the traction that we need. Our airport will connect to Asia, and there are planes that can land here and take off to Singapore, and we should be extending the runway, because a capital city without a runway is like a garage without a jack. It doesn't make any sense for somebody with an office population that we can have and do have often, not to be able to fly to Singapore. So what I'm saying is, what's a ROMS, road of national significance, if it ends with a Fokker friendship at the end? I mean, you've got to be able to get there and then go on to the world. And what would be nicer than sitting in London and thinking, well, Singapore then Wellington. I mean, they have this thing called a STIM factor when they deal with proposed new airline routes. It's a horrible word, really, but it's a stimulation factor. And they don't really know how much that will grow, but it's usually 30–40%. But I believe Wellington would double what they knew Wellington was going to fly at. So they work out how many people fly from Wellington, and there's quite a few that do. Easily enough to have 5 planes a week. There's 250,000 people, I think, that originate flights from Wellington. They go to Auckland mostly every year. I'm saying our 15,000 desks will fill, and I'm saying really that they'll either fill with office work or part residentialisation, which is really the thing that helped the city last time in the 1990s. So I have a little story from Oricon. That used to be Connell Wagner, and before that it was something Brickle Moss, but they have a history in Wellington. They've been here for a long time. My friend Bruce Manners is the director of that now in Wellington. They were having a party the other week, and they were reflecting upon what people still worked for them in Wellington, going back 25 years. So 25 years ago, they had 60 people in their office, and they counted 14 people that still worked for them in Wellington. That can say a whole lot of good things or a whole lot of bad things. But when they did a similar, when they cast their eyes over the Auckland office 25 years ago, they had 1. Now, that's the difference between Wellington and Auckland in terms of churn and staff turnover. There's a huge amount of people that come to Auckland and go, come to Auckland and go. If you were a serious long-term employer, Wellington would be far and away the best place to be. That's what I say. So, the other thing about Oricon is they have 40 people working in Wellington at the moment full-time on energy projects in Australia. They win the work competitively, and they do the work from Wellington. And I think Fairfax is about the same. I think Fairfax has got about 40 people, and it seems to be growing. And I think I heard the other day that they might get the work on the Sydney Morning Herald. And Sir Geoffrey Tamer's son works on, I think, sub-editing on something in Newcastle, which is all done from Wellington. So that's actually really quite good news, and it's one of the reasons I believe I can claim that it's almost inevitable that we will start winning back office work from Sydney and Melbourne. And it's not the best thing for Wellington to do, but it's not the worst thing either. And it'll get us pumping again.
Ian, is the reason for that cost difference or time difference or both?
Okay, so the cost difference seems to be quite huge. So you have quite strong unions in Australia, and any particular job in Australia that is paying $1,000 a week Australian will probably only pay $800 a week New Zealand. And if you add all of the location costs and efficiencies, you end up getting your work done for 65% of what it costs in Australia. Now, 6 months ago, a year ago, Australians would not have countenanced giving Kiwis the time of day, really. I mean, they're very competitive and incredibly parochial sort of race. But these days, there is no growth in the world, so cost cutting is your only option. So we'll send them the truck drivers to Perth, and we'll hopefully get some of their work in New Zealand. Because Sydney and Melbourne are really reasonably inefficient cities. I know they've got those magnificent metros, but apart from that, there's a hugeness of it. So everybody travels very long distances, or most people travel long distances. So that's it's almost inevitable that Wellington will latch onto that and pick that work up, unless we get very polite with the Australians and don't want to hurt them as well. So there must be Australians in the room. They must be taking a risk here. We will become the Geneva of the Southern Hemisphere. I mean, you know, United Nations and all these sort of things, they've all got to be somewhere. I can't think of a better place than Wellington. And we will be recognised as one of the most efficient cities in the world. Now, people sometimes smirk and smile when I say that, but we did a survey of 1,300 people that worked for ACC in Auckland and Wellington. And it was done incredibly scientifically with informametrics. And we really didn't push it to get the result that we wanted, but we got the result we wanted anyway. And it was a Google map which showed where people came from to get to work and by what means of transport they travelled. And in Wellington, only 15% of the commuter people came to work in a car alone, which is a hard one to bear. There's a lot of costs associated with that: parking, roads, pollution, how many things you like to think of. Everywhere else in the world, and particularly around here, it's 65%. So it was 65% in Christchurch and 65% in Auckland. Now, in the end, in a world which is going green, either because it's the colour or because you just want the same outcomes in terms of efficiency and cost, that will start becoming incredibly important. We have a rail network which really will only work when more people travel on it. I mean, and we're not going to scrap it. So I mean, we have a city that can take people reasonably easily. And one of my arguments is that you try and inject 100,000 people into Auckland, you're going to pay through the nose on motorways and future operating costs, and you wonder why you do it. You wonder why, if you were running New Zealand, why you think that making that problem grow larger and larger and larger was a smart thing to do. So I just want to finish with where I see Wellington going, which is really tertiary education, which is massive, and the creative industries, which are things that are widespread. But I mean, there's lots of bright people in Wellington doing wonderful stuff, and you only get to hear about them from time to time, or when the awards come up every year. And you know, general brightness. I mean, we're just generally brighter. I mean, we have more sunshine hours in a year, and it's really got to be a place where our sons and daughters want to come home to. I mean, I think it must be heartbreaking for people in Christchurch to see their children go and never come back, because that city's got a long uphill struggle. Okay, well, please ask me questions. I think I've talked enough. Or if you don't want to ask me questions, I can sit down. Hi.
You missed out the fact that we're so central.
Oh, well, yes, I took that for granted.
What effect do you think Transmission Gully, eventually when that gets completed, what effect do you think that will have on, say, the 15,000 desks available in Wellington?
I think it'll be generally really positive. I'm amazed by the number of English people that have arrived in New Zealand lately. Everywhere you look, and particularly professionals and people with quite a few skills, you see quite a few Englishmen, I mean, obviously South Africans as well. But we have two working for us, and they love getting on the train. It's a little bit like, you know, going into London, but it's only an hour, and it's cheap, and you get to a place up the coast which is good. So I mean, what you need to look for in Wellington, which is the greatest little city in this part of the world and wonderful to live in, is the corollaries. So the corollaries are some people don't want to live in the city, but they want to come and work here. So you have to, if you accommodate all of those, then you get I think you get growth. So Wellington will become more attractive as a result of the road, I think.
Peter,
what difference, if any, do you think the form of local government will make to this?
Well, I mean, eventually, I think we're going to amalgamate on some basis or other, but I think the most important thing are the tasks that need to be done. Who does them will depend upon a personality more than anything else. I mean, you could get a dud regional mayor, just as you could get a dud Wellington mayor. So you could get a dud regional mayor.
You've got up there, you know, the 15,000 desks going to fill from Australia. I guess there'll obviously be competition from Auckland, Wellington, and Dunedin, as well as Christchurch. You've also got up there something you've skipped over, which is 30,000 people living in the city. Where are they going to live? We're going to see, again, a plethora of new apartment buildings going up.
Boy, have I got the answer for you. So, in the same way that Wellington was saved in the 90s by people living in town, it'll get saved again in this particular iteration. And it's true to say that we're not going to do it by people buying endless numbers of apartments, because we just about run out of the number of people that can afford the apartments that are being sold in the city. But that doesn't change the fact that people want to live in the city. So in Europe, it's given that people live in their cities, and it's been going on for centuries, and it works extremely well. Now, in Australia and New Zealand, we didn't do that. We just left them out of there, which is why the 3 people, if there were 3 people, way back then, in 1985 or whatever, has already jumped so much. And the one thing that's not been catered for is people renting. So 20,000 people come to Wellington for tertiary education every year. They all would love to live in the city. They don't want to come in from Titaia Bay with a bus and a train and a bus. And they don't want to own a car. And it's a good deal if they can get into the city. So if you can find a building which is earthquake fine, and it's got air and light, then there's no better use for it in the next 4 or 5 years until we get all these jobs in Australia than living in it. Reinforced concrete lifts. They're marvellous things, buildings, but they're sort of, just because you haven't filled them with office people, you need to think of the next best use, and the next best use is filling the city with people. I didn't say anything about what I wanted to say.
Following on from that, could you expand on your comment about Geneva?
Well, these Swiss are incredibly clever people. Somehow or other they milk the world without giving too much of their own country away. I mean, I don't know how they do it, so insurance and banking. I mean, we need to have thinking like that. I mean, John Key used to talk about it. He used to talk about, I'm not sure if he talked about Wellington or Auckland, but he wanted, various elements of finance and banking attracted to New Zealand. And organisations have to choose the right places for these sort of things, and Geneva suits the United Nations in various parts, and I'm not sure all the places that are there, but there's a number of them that choose that place. I would have thought Wellington qualifies extremely well for that. I mean, it's a Canberra, but it's a hell of a lot more lively and does all the other things that the city does. It's like, I mean, I would have thought very appealing.
Ian, one of the reasons I think most Wellingtonians would think we did so well coming out of the last downturn was because of that absolutely positively Wellington spirit. And you sort of get the impression now that Wellingtonians have perhaps lost faith a little bit in Wellington. Any answers for that?
But aren't we at the same point in the cycle now? Like, you can feel it coming, can't you? I mean, I think there's so much. I think everyone in this room thinks that we're lacking something. We need to get going. We're putting up with too much bad news. It's time to sort of take the charge. I mean, I think that's the thing that came just before absolutely positively Wellington. I think the scene is set for a bit of action, isn't it? I mean, I certainly gauge it from people, even though I only listen to what I want to hear. Richard.
Ian, here's a presentation issue on the horizon. The new chief executive, Grow Wellington, has a budget of $4 million. All the local authorities in, not a large budget, but what would be the what would be your priority for the new chief executive who actually comes coming from Christchurch, Canterbury Film Authority? What should they be doing?
So you're obviously aware of the Destination Wellington Fund as well. And I think as a result of that, there's been an alignment of what Grow Wellington wants to achieve. What I think they should be doing is driving this case for location here in Wellington as opposed to Auckland. And I think we have to be quite clear about this. I mean, Auckland is not good for them to go to. I mean, I don't think it's good from a national point of view. I don't think we have to get rude about it, but we do need to make it clear that Wellington is head and shoulders above them as a place. So I suppose we need to get out to the organisations in Sydney and Melbourne and make it clear to them what the offer is, how it works, why they should consider it. And we shouldn't be afraid of incentivising people. I mean, Bob Jones, for instance, one of the things he does is he offers triple the real estate commission to fill his buildings. And to typical Bob, everything he does works, of course, and it's been amazingly successful, and all his buildings are full. So maybe he's been so clever that he hasn't ever had to spend that 3 times commission, I don't know. But you see what I'm saying, we've got to be much more, the word's aggressive, but we have to get much more focused, put more resource into it, not be too scared of it. Because after all, our city is an entity, and it's suffering at the moment. It needs that sort of push and shove and go, really. I don't think I've answered the question very well, have I?
Yeah, Ian, great to see you here. What about the fact that some government organisations, and NZTE in particular, are advising companies to go to Auckland rather than here, Australian and American companies, when they're looking at where to settle? How's that going to be counted?
Well, I think that's a gutting thing, isn't it? I mean, why on earth does that happen? Why on earth does somebody from NZTE want to direct people away from the city? And was or wasn't it true that Stephen Joy suggested that IBM set up their 400-person centre in Auckland? And IBM's always been in Wellington. I mean, I think we have to be much more effective with government. We have to make it clear to them how important we are. I mean, at the moment they think, I don't know, I get the feeling that this is sort of viewed as a little parasite pit, which is a cost centre and doesn't do anything else. These 15,000 desks that I'm talking about, that's a little bit like irrigating the South Island. I mean, that's really good for the country, but it's not being seen that way. So I think it's important for all of us to sort of push that story, because at the moment we're literally sitting at the side of the road.
Your picture is a pretty optimistic one, but at the same time it seems to rely on us having a weaker currency and higher unemployment than Australia. Do you think there's a contradiction there somewhere?
I know that as you come around the corner, your dollar tends to rise, and I know that we are rising against the Australian at the moment. So I can see that there's some, you start counter-effecting what you're trying to achieve. But we've always been 84, 85 against the Australian, and I don't think it's unemployment so much, because people will travel to where the work is. I contend, for instance, that the youth of New Zealand, and if you ask them, the ones that knew what the differences in the various cities were, which city they prefer to study in or live in, that Wellington would get incredibly high marks. So I think you'll attract the people here quite easily. And
Yeah, very helpful. I wonder if you care to comment on the contribution retail will make along to.
So I see retail as an Sorry.
We had 350 people at the annual Top Shop competition on Friday night, which is, after 25 years, shows the faith that members of that industry has in itself. I like to think we have a bright future here. We have few malls. Would you care to comment on the future of retail in the Wellington context?
Well, I've always seen retail as being almost an equal partner of the office workforce. It's almost unique in Australasia that you don't need a car park next to your building. And that's because of this conspiracy between the office people and the retailers, particularly the Brown Lantern Quay. And it is one of the most glorious things about Wellington. It's a sort of an unspoken partnership. But obviously retail is threatened as the office building's empty. So, I mean, I think that's something we should cherish and obviously build on. And I'm quite delighted about the lack of malls, which I think are the most hideous things that have been invented. But I think they're being slaughtered by the internet at the moment. So yeah, no, I'm a mad fan of Wellington retail. I think it's exactly the right flavour for Wellington to. Although having said that, I think it's time Lantern Quay residentialised. It's time we got more people living down that part of the city, so that when you go at night time, you bump into people on the pavement drinking beer or coffee or whatever it is they drink.
Thank you, Wellington Rotarians, for making it an Eden Rotarian welcome. You skipped, Ian, over tertiary education. The thing is that at the University of Otago, we are top in the performance-based research funding. That's something for you to aspire to. We also have 1,300, it is. You also have we have 1,300 PhD students. What potential are you working on to develop that position from a rather lowly position that the Victoria University holds? Shall I go now?
excited about that.
I can't see how I could possibly comment on it. There is one thing I have to say, and that is that
We're going to jointly ride up and respond. First of all, University, the best known international university, which will attract more students into this town than anywhere else.
And on behalf of the Council of Victoria University, we must be growing at the fastest growth rate in terms of science and engineering in New
The
Zealand.
Western world.
well,
And I think Auckland University is top on the PBRF too.
No, it's,
I do have to say one thing.
North too.
Our business is doing well for one particularly good reason. That is, we stole an idea from Dunedin, and that is that when you lease a flat down there, you've got to lease it on the basis of a year. We just started doing that a couple of years ago, and we've never been empty ever since. And you lease your apartments from 1 year to the next. So, thank you very much, Dunedin, for that idea. And we're pleased to make your students.
Any more questions? One last question. One over there.
Just about your comment, I happened to watch a little bit of Morning TV, and I can't recall the program, I got the last bit of it. But there seemed to be some discussion, and not very positive, around the fact that we were going to spend a bit of money to hold the Hobbit premiere. And I was really disappointed, because I would have thought that the rest of the country would have been really excited about the fact that we were on the international stage once again. I just wondered what your thoughts were. I mean, you know, where's the leadership of our community people and our councillors, etc., to make sure that kind of, I mean, it was really quite a negative program.
Well, I think it was Jo Coghlan did speak up for it. I mean, she said that it was of huge benefit. I mean, it'd be nice if they had some way of quantifying that and describing it. But I mean, 50% of the country seems to be people who get a thrill from whinging. I mean, it's anyone that spends anything or does anything or tries to improve themselves, they get whinged at. It's just, it's one of the things wrong with New Zealand at the moment, is the New Zealanders that are in it.